Welcome to the Really Know Your Customer podcast with your hosts, Betsy Westhafer and Tony Bodoh. Join Betsy and Tony as they dive in with highly successful C-suite leaders who have grown successful organizations by creating a laser focus on listening to their customers and building deep customer relationships. Now, it's time to join Betsy and Tony for the Really Know Your Customer show.
Hi, and welcome to the Really Know Your Customer podcast. I am Tony Bodoh.
And I'm Betsy Westhafer, and we are so happy that you're here today.
Absolutely. Today we have an amazing guest, Mark S.A. Smith. Mark is this gentleman I met probably 4 years ago, and the moment we start talking, we couldn't stop. I mean, he's just a fantastic individual, which you're going to get today as we go through this podcast. And he's one of those individuals who is a master at sales and the sales experience, and he really understands human experience from that perspective.
You know, Tony, he's also a master teacher. I feel like Mark's one of those people that every single conversation I have with him, I learn something. Now, I also did attend his executive summit, which of course I learned a ton. My brain was so full when I left that. But he's just a natural born teacher. And I think that will also come through in this episode. We had a great conversation with Mark. It was so great, in fact, that we decided to turn it into a two-parter. So what you're about to hear will be the first part where we'll be talking about risk mitigation. And Tony, you can talk a little bit more about that. But stay tuned because we have two great episodes with Mark S.A. Smith.
Yes, absolutely. It was fantastic to hear him. And so in this first episode, we're going to talk about risk mitigation and the fundamentals that go into risk mitigation. How do you create risk mitigation in your sales process? Because as Mark talks about it, it's not about being the best choice. It's about being the safest choice. That's how you're going to be able to sell, especially in today's environment.
Yeah, and he really brings it home to what resonates with us, Tony, as far as what that means for your customers. And so I really am excited to share this episode, and I think everybody will learn a tremendous amount from Mark Smith.
Thank you, Betsy and Tony. It's always a delight. You two trigger in me new insights on a regular basis. I can't wait to find out what we uncover today.
Yeah, we were talking about how we have no idea where this conversation may go, and that's the exciting part about it.
Well, that's the great thing about working with world-class business leaders like you and Tony, is that your depth is so extraordinary that you never know what's going to bubble up to the surface to address the issues. I can't wait.
Well, and one of the things that I really love about our conversations, Mark, that you and I have had, and Betsy, I, and you have had as we've gone through the last couple of years, is that, as you said, we always find something deeper. And something that I never really thought about, you brought to my attention about 3 years ago, probably in our first or second conversation, and that is this idea of risk and how risk affects the customer experience, and especially in that sales process. And we talk about that extensively together. Yes. So I'm looking forward to hearing where you want to go with that today and what that can bring out for our audience.
Wonderful. Well, enough of the self-aggrandizement. Let's get into the conversation with our audience.
We're not quite done with the self-aggrandizement yet. Mark, for our audience who hasn't had the benefit of getting to know you the way Tony and I have, tell us a little bit about your career journey, where you are now, the types of work you're focused on, and just kind of bring us up to speed on your career.
Indeed. Well, I'm a business growth strategist. I've been doing that for 30 years. I started off as an electrical engineer, never did any engineering, but it means I'm a systems thinker. I've always been bringing disruptive technology to market. A disruptive technology is something that once customers understand what it does for them, they will never go back to the old way of doing business. Great example of that is mobile phones. None of us have landlines. Now, nobody that I know has a landline anymore. Complete disruption. Well, the technology, of course, is very difficult to bring to market because nobody knows what it is. They don't know what to ask Google because they don't even know the technology exists. So over the past 38 years, 30 years of which I've been running my own company, I have been figuring out how to bring technology to market rapidly and accelerate the sales cycle as fast as humanly possible. And along the way, what I discovered is that perceived risk is the friction between the desire of the customer to purchase and the actual pulling the trigger and placing the order. And so what I want to share with you today is my insights around perceived risk and 8 ways that we can mitigate that perceived risk, lowering it to the lowest possible place so that customers can safely and securely, within their mind, purchase. That's really the intention behind that. And along the way, I've worked with a lot of big companies, a lot of small companies. And if you, listener, have an interesting product you want to bring to market, let's have a conversation. I'd be delighted to share with you some of my insights beyond what we're doing here today.
Mark, can you just give us a little more context around your leadership summits? I know that they're just so high value, and I'd really like for our listeners to have an opportunity to learn more about that as well.
Oh, thank you, Betsy. I appreciate that. Well, the Executive Strategy Summit, which is a really awful name, but it describes exactly what it is. And that is, we help people who own businesses and run businesses think like executives by honing in on strategy, understanding what strategy is. What I have learned is that 80% of business owners don't understand strategy. They say things like, we have a strategic plan. Well, that is an oxymoron. Strategy and plan are 2 different things. And if you're going, huh? What does that mean? You need to consider coming to Summit, because they are radically different. A plan is very different than a strategy. So what I've done is I teach people how to think like an executive because of the work that I have done with executives over the past 38 years. I've teased out their secrets. That's what engineers do. They go in there and figure out how things work, and then they turn it into a repeatable system. And that's exactly what Summit is. So we work on your skill set, your mindset, and your tool set as an executive. And as a business growth strategist, the company can only grow as fast as the executive expands their capacity to grow, and as fast as they can bring new customers in. So most of my work through the past 3 decades has been around up-leveling executive mindset and putting into place customer acquisition systems that are scalable and repeatable. And the summit really came out of that. And the reason why is because it's a whole lot easier to run somebody through a 3-day event where I get them up to speed than to work with them individually over the same 30 hours. That's hard. Instead, come with a group of people, learn all together, and walk out with insights and a plan.
Excellent. That is awesome to hear. And I'm looking forward to being at your next one. It is going to be an experience that I would not miss. I'll say that.
Thank you, Tony. I can't wait to have you in the audience.
Yeah,
it's been 3 years getting you there, my friend, but okay.
I know. But it's what fascinates me, Mark, is how we have built this relationship completely over Zoom.
That's right.
And it's been 3 years, I guess, in that process. So it's been phenomenal. And we had you on our profitability bounce back summit not long ago. And
yeah, that's right. You tapped me 3 times.
Exactly. You did a phenomenal job there. And that got me thinking, for the podcast that we wanted to get you on here as well, because as I said, when we kicked this off, we often think about customer experience as kind of the end of the journey. If, after the order's been placed and products are filled, then we get into customer experience. Well, Betsy and I have been teaching differently than that for a long time. We said it's all the way back before your customer is even a customer, before they're even a prospect, before they're even aware. What are the subconscious things? And so you're a critical part of that process and understanding what the experience is. And honestly, while security is always an issue, especially in today's world, a lot of different versions of feeling secure when the customer has your product or your service. But that sales process, I never thought about how important it was to feel that security, that mitigation of risk right there. So talk to us about that.
Oh, yes. Great. Well, let's go pop up level and talk about what is risk. So risk delays or stops all sales. It is the poison of all sales. And risk is fear objectified. That's all. And the reason why it's fear objectified is because no executive would ever say, I'm afraid. No, instead they say, I sense risk. So everything you know about fear, we can apply to risk. Remember, risk or fear is a belief in an undesired outcome potentially occurring. And of course, the opposite of fear is hope, which is the belief in a desired outcome occurring. They're just the opposites of the 2 poles. So the typical risk analysis may not address the underlying fear, which may cause the analysis to be incomplete. So for that reason, we need to dig down and understand what they're afraid of. Keep in mind that risk is always a judgment. It's true. Risk is always a judgment. My middle son, bombing down the slopes on his snowboard fearlessly, doing things that I would never, ever attempt. Same slope, same moment in time, two different judgments on what is risky and what's not. So what's risky to one person is riskless to another, and experience decreases the perceived risk. So for example, if you've worked with a company before, if you've bought from them before, you've had the brand experience, you consider that purchase to be substantially less risky than if you had no experience with it at all. So experience is one of the ways that we eliminate risk. And then the mitigation factors, the fundamental mitigation factors that we're going to look at, of course, is experience is one. Next is education. When people are educated, they feel things are less risky because they feel like they have a better control of the circumstances. Next is equipment. Equipment helps us mitigate risk. That's why we wear helmets, gloves, masks. That's all about mitigating risk. And then the final one is environment. So if the environment is right now wide open, low risk of getting any infection, if it's tight, people are afraid they might catch something from somebody else. There's cooties everywhere, I swear. So understanding the fact that we have these four factors come into play, education, experience, equipment, and environment, we can bring some of those into play to help reduce the perceived risk, guardrails, things like that. A really good example of that is, Tony, I know you have two young daughters, and when they started off wanting to drive cars, of course, they had no experience, they had no education, they had equipment, your car, and of course, they had the environment, the roads of Nashville, which scares you a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
And so if during one of those nasty Tennessee thunderstorms that come through, and if they have limited experience and limited education, you're not going to let them out in the car because the environment is outside of their control. But if they have been driving for a number of hours, and if they have had driver's education, and they do drive that great big heavy car that you have, and you have them out in the sunshine during the daytime, you know that the risk involved in them being out driving is low. But you won't let them go out at night. You won't let them go out in the rain. You won't let them go out and drive their friend's cheap car. Those are all ways that we can take a look at risk. Is that helpful?
Absolutely. I think that really nails it. And using the example of the kids that's driving is exactly the example I use when I'm teaching people about the perception of a challenge and how we get into overwhelm. So it's interesting how this aligns, Mark, and you know, you and I have had these conversations before, but this is kind of a new bent for me in thinking about it from the challenge perspective and how that's risk. So I'm gonna toss it back over to Betsy because I know she's got a couple questions to kind of throw your way as well.
Oh, and I got plenty more to share with you.
Yeah, and I can't wait. So don't wait for me to ask a question. But one of the things I am really interested in your perspective is with what's happening with this massive transition in the business environment and thinking about risk. What are you seeing just from personal observation as far as, you know, you talked about in the summit, you talked about mindset, skill set, and tool set. Yeah. What are you seeing in terms of the mindset of the executive leaders that you're talking with?
Well, those that are successful have overcome this fear. They're operating at the top level of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. They're seeing the facts as they truly are. They are connected with their heart. They're not in fear, they're in hope. And they understand that what we have to do is help pull our employees, our team, our customers out of the lower two levels of Maslow's, which operate in fear. Fear for your life, fear for your capacity to live well. And so in Maslow's, the bottom two levels are fear-based. The top three levels are hope-based. And as we ascend Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we have increasing cognitive capacity. At the bottom of Maslow's, we can only think of one thing at a time. I'm starving. I need food. You know, I've got to go to the bathroom right now. I can't breathe. I need help. That's a single factor at Maslow's lowest level. At the top level, we can handle 10, 20, 30, 50 things at a time. Depends on your cognitive capacity. So leaders who understand this, which we teach. We teach cognitive capacity as the primary tool, the primary resource of executives, the ability to handle complexity. And so we do everything we possibly can to manage that complexity, or we manage that cognitive capacity. And part of it is mindset. Indeed. All right. So let's talk about the effect of risk on purchase decision. Keep in mind, friends, every purchase decision has career impact. And the reason why is because the only way you can make serious money in the corporate world is by being promoted. Can't get by with that lousy 2%, 3% per year raise. You have to promote yourself up. And in a corporate environment, decisions are a risk versus reward evaluation. The question is, does this purchase make me more promotable or less promotable? Will this impact my career if it goes well? Will it have a negative impact if it doesn't go well? How will my scorekeepers take a look at this decision? And how can I make my scorekeeper look good? Had a conversation just a couple of days with Mark DeMassimo that we mentioned earlier. And he was talking that he did some research and found out that most of the time, the people he's working with are thinking about what the boss 2 levels up are thinking. And interestingly, the answer that he has gotten in his research is what the boss 2 levels up is thinking is, what are my customers thinking? Right? Well, so the whole point here is that if you make a good decision, purchase decision, you're promotable. And if you make a purchase decision that goes bad, is this going to have an impact on my career? And the reason why is because every decision is going to be either a good decision or a bad decision. As you pointed out, Tony, it takes 11 positive experiences to overcome a single negative experience, maybe even more depending on the impact. But the whole point is that if we have an unresolved negative experience as somebody making a purchase decision, it has a substantial impact on our capacity to be promoted, because the boss will never promote somebody to their inner circle that would embarrass them, just like their boss would never promote somebody in their inner circle that would embarrass them. So there is an impact chain up the corporate structure based on the fear of making a decision that will be perceived as being poor judgment. Now, this also works for relationships. The reason why people get divorced is because their spouse or they make bad decisions sufficiently to the point that they're no longer trusted. Is this a helpful insight?
Very much so. I think the piece that stands out to me here is how Betsy and I have talked a long time about how business to business really isn't about business. It's person to person.
Oh, yeah.
And I think you're hitting it on the head here. People have often told us, well, business to customer experience is so much different than business to business. And in reality, it's not. It very much is in the early stages about risk mitigation.
Absolutely.
Is this product going to serve me and my needs, whatever those may be? And often it's about how it affects me as an individual.
Absolutely. And my relationships with other people. I can take hits. If I make bad decisions and it's just me, nobody knows, nobody cares. But the moment that I'm in a relationship, all my decisions have an impact on how trustworthy or consistent that I am. And that's where it really comes into play. And business and consumer to consumer, you always have a spouse, a girlfriend, a boyfriend, a family, mothers, fathers, aunts, uncles, cousins, brothers, sisters, all which have an opinion about that decision. It impacts that. Yeah. Corporations, it's just up the food chain.
Yeah. And it's interesting. So the self-image aspect of this comes into play, it sounds like, as well. And it's not so much what I think of myself, which is a key element to the buying, but it's what I think others think of me.
That's right.
That's what matters here.
That's what matters here. All right. So let's talk about how customers look at the risk of a particular purchase. And to explain this, I have a simple 4-quadrant model. Of course we do. As consultants, we love 4-quadrant models. It organizes chaos, so we bring clarity to our thoughts. So the horizontal axis, at one end we have a low perceived purchase risk. At the other end of the axis, we have high perceived purchase risk. And that is absolutely perception. If they've never bought before, we're on the high end. If they've bought over and over again, we're on the low end. Now, to make this interesting, let's add another vertical axis, which is this within your personal approval limit, or is it above your personal purchase limit? Everybody has a purchase limit. Everybody. In corporations, people have signature authorities, $2,500, $5,000 at the lower level, $100,000 at an upper level. Above that, you have to go to the board of directors, that kind of stuff. Everybody has a purchase level approval. And even we do personally. It's how much money do we have in our bank account? What do we have available in credit? What does our spouse allow us to purchase without asking somebody else? For example, Molly, she and I have an agreement that anything below $500, if you want it, get it. Anything above $500, let's check in. Of course, that rule doesn't apply to Molly. And you all are laughing because you know it's true.
I'm just going to say as it should be. But.
I'm so glad you did.
And since my wife can hear me right now, I'm not going to answer that question.
It's a good thing you have headphones in. All right. So the point is that if you have a purchase that's within your signature authority and considered to be a low perceived risk, this is a very low consideration, low resistance purchase. It happens fast. Now, even if you have purchased again and again, if it's above your purchase authority, it starts to become a higher consideration, higher risk. And the reason why is because this has to be approved by somebody else who has a different view of what's risky and what's riskless. And so there's this chain of consideration. It slows things down. If you have to go get approval, it slows things down. So there's an issue there. Now, if you have something that is that you perceive as being high purchase risk within your purchase authority, it still is a high consideration, high resistance purchase, because if things go wrong, you still have to explain yourself. And that causes career risk. Now, if we have the upper right-hand quadrant where we have high perceived purchase risk and above the personal approval, this takes forever. This is where you have 90, 120, 3-year purchase cycles because of all the work that has to be done for the due diligence to reduce the perceived risk. So what I want to do is have you rethink about the word sales cycle. It's actually a consideration cycle. Your sales only takes as long as the customer takes to consider. So if we can reduce the consideration cycle, you speed the sales cycle. So the question becomes, how can we reduce the perceived risk of the buyer and their boss? That's how we speed the sale. Is that helpful?
Very much so. And I love that, just the nuance of the phrasing, consideration cycle versus sales cycle. I just think that's really good. I have a question that just popped into my head with regard to risk, and being that we're in the throes of something none of us have ever seen before. What do you think is the biggest risk that executives are either knowingly taking or unknowingly taking?
There's 2 risks that I see them either knowingly or unknowingly taking. Number one is communications. They don't communicate nearly enough. It's a time like these that communication helps reduce people's concern as we fill in the details. Remember, it's education, experience, equipment, and environment that set up the risk equation. And so we have to communicate about what have we learned, education, experience. What have we experienced? What have we done to manage this equipment? What are we doing to improve it? I walked into the Whole Food stores and there was a sheet of plexiglass between me and my favorite cashier. Guess no hugging and kissing that day, right? And then the environment, right? Summer's coming on. We're getting a lot more UV light. The virus does not survive for very long at all in the sunshine. Not at all. Going out without sunscreen. Let's get some vitamin D. Forget the skin cancer. Let's get the vitamin D. Right? And so you have to communicate about what you're doing. That's the first thing. The second thing is conservation. You have to conserve the right things. I see executives that shut off every purchase. Well, that's not prudent. And the reason why is essentially what you've done is you put the brakes on your business. And those who are willing to venture forward into the unknown, knowing that this is going to end, all pandemics end, all bleeding stops, all crises come to a close, all wars come to a conclusion. You know this is going to be over. And so you have to prepare for the next transition out of here. So companies that are stopping marketing, stopping sales, stopping education are those that are at risk to not surviving the restart. So those are the 2 things that I see, and I'm working with my corporate clients around managing appropriately. All right. So to sum up our conversation around consideration cycle, the biggest business mistake is using low consideration sales tactics for high consideration deals. And a low consideration tactic is, hey, tell you what, if you can buy today, I'll knock off 20 points. Bad. Leaves money on the table, and you haven't understood what's the friction to the deal. Price is rarely the true friction to the deal. Because if they can't afford it, they're not going to be looking at it. There is a self-filtration. So what we want to do is talk about how then can we make this pivot to using high consideration methodologies to reduce this perceived risk. So there is a key sales pivot that I want you to think about. The role of the sales professional is not to persuade prospects that this is the best product, but to reduce the perceived risk to the point that the prospect feels that this is the safest choice. Best is a judgment. We've already talked about that. Yeah, a salesperson comes to me and says, Mark, we've got the very best product in the world. And I say, bullshit, and I can prove it. So, what are you talking about? Do you have competition? Absolutely. Are they good? Yeah. You're not the best for that group of people. So stop saying things that people can disagree with. No. What we want to do is become the safest choice. Best is a bad strategy other than comparing your three good, better, and best. That's the classic way of presenting three different options. And people usually buy the middle option, but that's between your product lines, not yours and somebody else's.
Wow, what a great show. I mean, just being able to listen to Mark talk about these fundamentals, the foundation of risk and risk mitigation and how to do it, it's got me thinking differently about what we do and in our businesses. And if you really think about risk and safety and security is such a big issue in most companies, but even more so right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And what strikes me about a conversation like that is risk mitigation can be a dry topic if in the wrong circumstances. Mark makes it interesting and exciting and challenging, and he really helps you understand why you have to pay so much attention to these kinds of things. So just a great conversation, and can't wait to share the second part of this conversation.
Absolutely, which is going to be fantastic. So please come back and join us for the second part, because we're going to dive into actually how you apply these foundations.
And thank you once again for joining us on the Really Know Your Customer podcast.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Really Know Your Customer. We hope you gained a lot of value from being here today. If you want to learn more about the work Betsy and Tony do to help their clients thrive, visit Betsy at thecongruitygroup.com and Tony at tonybodoh.com. See you next time on the Really Know Your Customer show.